What if your life depended on 3 minutes? Not courage, not armor, just 3 minutes. December 19th, 1944. Woods outside Nouville, Belgium. In the freezing darkness, a German tank commander named Klaus Wendel grips his pencil with trembling fingers. His breath turns to frost inside the steel shell of his Panther tank. He writes in his small notebook, "The Americans have a new hunter. We hear them, but never see them." Moments later, across the tree line, engines roar. The sound rises and fades, too fast, too distant, too unreal. Wendel's men never see what's coming. Within minutes, 3 German tanks lie burning in the snow. What happened defied everything he had learned about war. The Americans had built a machine that should not have existed. Too light to survive, too fast to fight, too fragile to be real. Yet, it was very real. And it hunted without mercy. The M18 Hellcat was born not from brute strength, but from belief. Belief that speed itself could be a weapon. It was the fastest armored vehicle of World War II, capable of moving 55 miles per hour on the battlefield. For German crews, it was not just an enemy, it was a ghost, a phantom that appeared and vanished before their guns could turn. But this is not a story about metal and machinery. It is a story about a nation that dared to think differently, that proved the strongest armor was the mind willing to adapt. Because in the cold winter of 1944, when the world was frozen by fear, one idea raced faster than any tank the world had ever seen. Speed is life. The story of the M18 Hellcat does not begin on the battlefield. It begins in a meeting room filled with cigarette smoke, worry, and doubt. It was December of 1941, just days after the attack on Pearl Harbor. America had been thrust into a war it was not prepared to fight, facing an enemy that had been perfecting the art of armored warfare for nearly a decade. Across the Atlantic, the German Wehrmacht had already rewritten the rules of war. Their panzers, sleek, disciplined, and terrifyingly efficient, had crushed Europe beneath their treads. France fell in 6 weeks. Poland collapsed in days. Even the mighty British Army had barely escaped annihilation at Dunkirk. To the world, the Germans were invincible, their tanks unstoppable. But in Washington, D.C., a quiet revolution was beginning. General Leslie McNair, a man known for his unshakable logic and calm authority, studied the battle reports coming from Europe. He saw something others didn't. The Germans weren't winning because of their tanks, they were winning because of their tactics. They moved fast, struck hard, and disappeared before the enemy could react. And so, McNair asked a question that would change everything. What if we fight their fire with speed? In November 1941, under his directive, the U.S. Army established the Tank Destroyer Command, a new force built not to defend, but to hunt. Its doctrine was radical, even blasphemous by the standards of the day. Seek, strike, destroy. No slow advances, no drawn-out duels, no waiting for reinforcements. These vehicles would move like predators, find the enemy's armor, strike first, and vanish before the counterattack. When the plan reached General Motors, the engineers were baffled. Buick's chief engineer, Joseph Roberts, was handed a list of requirements that made no sense. Build a vehicle that could carry a 76mm high-velocity gun, capable of destroying any German tank, yet weigh less than 20 tons. It had to reach 50 miles per hour, accelerate like a car, and still be stable enough to fire with precision. Roberts stared at the paper, then laughed. "You're asking for a race car with a cannon," he said. But the order stood. The factory in Flint, Michigan, began to hum with activity. Men and women, many of whom had never seen a tank before, started turning American industry into a weapon. The air smelled of oil and steel. Sparks flew as welders worked day and night. Women, known later as Rosie the Riveters, stood shoulder to shoulder, tightening bolts on a machine that would one day terrify the German army. By early 1943, the first prototype rolled out. It was small, almost delicate by comparison to German armor. Its armor plating was barely 1 inch thick. A single 88mm shell from a Tiger tank could tear straight through it. But when the driver started the engine, everything changed. The roar was like a hurricane. The machine surged forward, 0 to 30 miles per hour in just 7 seconds. In the test fields, it tore across frozen mud, climbed slopes no tank had ever dared, and cornered like a sports car. The engineers watching knew at once they had built something completely new. One mechanic, wiping grease from his hands, muttered under his breath, "It doesn't fight the same war." He was right. Where the Germans built fortresses, America had built a hunter. The M18 Hellcat was designed for one purpose: to move faster than fear. At Camp Hood, Texas, later known as Fort Hood, the first groups of American crews began training on this strange new vehicle. They were taught not to fight like tankers, but like ambushers. Never stay still for more than 30 seconds after firing, never engage head-on, always move, always strike from the flank. Their instructors repeated the motto again and again: speed is life. For the first time, speed became armor, movement became survival. The doctrine was dangerous, even reckless to some. Critics called it suicide, a tin can on tracks. But the men who drove it believed in it, because they knew something the German engineers had forgotten. War is not won by the strongest. It is won by those who adapt the fastest. While Hitler demanded super tanks like the 70-ton King Tiger, so heavy that bridges collapsed under its weight, American factories built thousands of lighter, faster machines. Germany could produce 90 Panthers a month. The US could replace that in a week. This was not just a difference in machinery. It was a difference in philosophy. In Germany, the war was fought by engineers chasing perfection. In America, the war was fought by people chasing progress. By mid-1944, the Hellcat was ready. It had passed every test, exceeded every expectation, and terrified every observer. What no one knew then was that its true test would come not on paper, not in the factory, but in the forests and fields of Europe, where it would prove that speed, in the hands of a free nation, could defeat even the mightiest of empires. The true test came in the summer of 1944. France had been liberated from the beaches of Normandy, but the cost had been brutal. Towns lay in ruins, fields were cratered with shell holes, and the air reeked of oil, blood, and smoke. In that chaos, the M18 Hellcat made its debut, not in theory, not in training, but in fire. The men of the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion were among the first to drive the new machines into battle. They called them Hellcats, not because of any official name, but because that was exactly what they were: fast, fierce, and unpredictable. Each crew consisted of 5 men: commander, gunner, loader, driver, and assistant driver. Most were barely 20 years old, yet they were about to face the most feared tanks in the world, the German Panthers and Tigers. In the rolling hills near the town of Arracourt, the fog hung low over the fields. The Germans had sent in the 113th Panzer Brigade, confident that their heavy tanks would crush the thin-skinned American destroyers. On the morning of September 19th, Lieutenant Edwin Leiper's platoon took position along a ridge, visibility no more than 30 feet ahead. The men could hear engines growling in the mist, the sound of Panthers crawling toward them. Leiper raised his hand. "Wait for it! Wait for it!" At 20 yards, he whispered the order: "Fire!" The first Hellcat roared, its 76mm gun flashing in the fog. A Panther burst into flames. Within minutes, 4 more German tanks were destroyed. The entire engagement lasted less than 5 minutes. The Americans lost 1 vehicle. The Germans lost 15. A sergeant later wrote in his report, "They never knew what hit them. We were gone before their turrets turned." That single sentence would come to define the Hellcat's legend. The shoot and scoop doctrine, firing and disappearing, was not just a tactic, it was survival. The Hellcat's thin armor could not withstand a single direct hit, but its speed meant it rarely needed to. After firing, drivers slammed the throttle, shifting positions before enemy gunners could respond. German crews, trained for deliberate engagements, were forced into panic. Their massive turrets rotated too slowly, their rangefinders too sluggish. By the time they found their targets, the Hellcats were already attacking from a new direction. This was no longer traditional tank warfare. It was chess at 60 miles an hour. The Battle of Arracourt became one of the most successful tank destroyer actions of the entire war. 39 German tanks destroyed for the loss of only 4 Hellcats. It was a 5-to-1 kill ratio that stunned Allied commanders and terrified the German high command. But the true legend of the Hellcat was born in the winter that followed. The Battle of the Bulge, December 1944. the Ardennes forest. Snow, silence, and death. The Germans had launched a desperate counteroffensive, the Battle of the Bulge. Thousands of tanks pushed through Belgium, aiming to split the Allied lines and reach Antwerp. For the Americans, it was the coldest, bloodiest winter of the war. Among those rushing to stop them was the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion, equipped with M18 Hellcats. Their orders were simple: hold Bastogne no matter the cost. Lieutenant David Hagens, leading a platoon of 4 Hellcats, moved into the woods near Neuville, just outside Bastogne. The temperature was below freezing, visibility almost zero. The men could hear the clanking of tracks in the distance. Panthers again. "Get ready," Hagens said quietly. "We hit them before they see us." When the first German tanks appeared through the fog, the Hellcats opened fire. One Panther exploded before it could even fire a shot. The rest swung their turrets, but the Hellcats were gone, already circling for another strike. Within 20 minutes, 7 German tanks were destroyed. 1 American vehicle was lost. Hagens radioed back to headquarters. "Tell command the cats are hunting." For the next 48 hours, his platoon and the rest of the 705th held their ground against overwhelming odds. By the time the snow cleared, more than 30 German tanks had been knocked out, delaying the enemy advance and saving Bastogne. General A.D. Bruce would later call the 705th the finest tank destroyer battalion ever trained. The unit would receive the Presidential Unit Citation for its actions that week. To the German crews trapped in the blizzard, it was a nightmare. They could hear the engines, they could see flashes in the fog, but they could never find the enemy. Many described the Hellcats as ghosts in the snow, the weapon of democracy. What made the Hellcat truly unstoppable was not just speed or surprise, it was numbers. American factories built them faster than Germany could replace its losses. While Hitler's engineers spent months crafting a single King Tiger, American workers, men, women, and minorities, assembled Hellcats like clockwork on the production lines in Flint, Michigan. Each rivet, each weld, each turn of a wrench told the same story: democracy at work. A factory foreman once said, "We didn't build tanks for glory. We built them so our boys could come home." And they did. By 1945, Hellcats had proven their worth across Europe. They fought in Italy, France, Belgium, and Germany. Everywhere speed was needed, they were there. In some battles, they crossed bridges too weak for heavy tanks, raced behind enemy lines, and cut off German retreats. To the men who fought in them, the Hellcat was more than a machine. It was a miracle of motion. They joked that it could outrun its own fear. But behind the jokes was something deeper: pride. Pride that their country had built something that didn't rely on size or intimidation, but on ingenuity. When the war ended, captured German officers were asked what weapon they feared most. Many answered without hesitation: the fast ones, the ones we could not catch. They were talking about the Hellcat. For them, every encounter felt the same. 3 minutes from the first roar of engines to the moment their tank caught fire. 3 minutes to realize that speed had become the deadliest weapon of the modern battlefield. The Hellcat had turned the tide, not because it was perfect, but because it was practical. Its crews didn't worship machines, they mastered them. Its engineers didn't chase perfection, they chased results. In those moments, on the fields of Arracourt, in the frozen woods of Bastogne, in the final days along the Rhine, the M18 Hellcat did more than destroy tanks. It destroyed the myth of German invincibility. It proved that a free nation, when united by purpose, can outthink and outrun any empire built on fear. By the spring of 1945, the world was changing. The smoke over Europe was beginning to clear, and the silence that followed was heavier than any explosion. The once proud German war machine lay in ruins, its cities bombed, its tanks burned, its soldiers weary and broken. Yet amid that devastation, a question lingered. How did this happen? How did the masters of armored warfare lose to a nation that had only entered the war 3 years earlier? The answer was not found in firepower or armor, it was found in philosophy. Germany had built monuments of steel: the Panther, the Tiger, the King Tiger. Each was a masterpiece of engineering: thick armor, precision optics, powerful guns. But they were also prisoners of their own perfection. They were too heavy, too complex, too slow. They needed perfect conditions, perfect fuel, perfect roads, perfect weather. America built something else entirely. The M18 Hellcat was the opposite of perfection. It was practical. Its armor was thin, its interior cramped, its guns sometimes underpowered. But it was fast, and it worked. Where German engineers built for pride, American engineers built for purpose. One historian later said, "Germany built fortresses, America built hunters. And hunters move, they adapt, they learn." In those last months of the war, even the German officers began to see the truth. Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, once head of German military intelligence, had tried to warn his superiors. His agents reported that the United States was producing armored vehicles at a rate the Reich could never match. But his reports were dismissed as lies, propaganda, or worse, defeatism. Canaris was later executed by the regime he had served. His final notes, found in a prison cell, read, "We were drowned in intelligence, but punished for speaking the truth. That truth was written not in ink, but in steel." When the Allies advanced into Germany, they found roads littered with abandoned Tigers and Panthers, machines too heavy to repair, too fuel-hungry to move, too fragile to survive the retreat. And racing past them, still running strong, were the Hellcats. The irony was profound. In chasing invincibility, Germany had built its own weakness. Every ton of armor added to a tank made it less capable of moving, less capable of adapting, less capable of surviving, in a world where mobility had become everything. The war had proven a simple but devastating principle. In the age of speed, the slowest mind loses first. At the same time, in the United States, another kind of army was fighting a different battle, the industrial army. In Flint, Michigan, at the Buick Motor Division, assembly lines ran day and night. Black workers from the South, women from small towns, immigrants from Europe, all stood shoulder to shoulder, building the machines that would cross the Atlantic and change history. They didn't wear uniforms, they didn't carry rifles, but they fought the same war. One woman, Rose Willil Monroe, would later become the face of Rosie the Riveter. She had worked on the B-24 Liberator bombers and often visited the Hellcat factory. In an interview after the war, she said, "Every rivet we drove, every bolt we tightened, we knew what it meant. It meant one more son coming home." The power of the Hellcat wasn't just in its engine, it was in the hands that built it, the unity of a nation that believed freedom was worth the effort. By March 1945, as Allied forces crossed the Rhine, Hellcats were everywhere. In one remarkable event, units of the 656th Tank Destroyer Battalion raced across the captured Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen. While it was too damaged for heavy tanks, their lightweight design allowed them to move where others could not. From those positions, they destroyed 11 German tanks, including 2 King Tigers, before the bridge finally collapsed. It was the perfect symbol of the Hellcat's legacy. The light outpacing the heavy, the nimble outmaneuvering the mighty. After Germany's surrender, American analysts began to study the numbers. They were staggering. Total Hellcats produced, 2007. Total enemy vehicles destroyed, 526 confirmed kills. Total Hellcats lost in combat, 216. Kill-to-loss ratio, 2.4 to 1, the highest of any American armored vehicle in World War II. But the numbers only told part of the story. The real victory lay in the eye, minds of those who designed, built, and drove the Hellcat. They had proven that the future of warfare belonged not to the heaviest machine, but to the fastest idea. When the war ended, captured German officers often spoke with disbelief. "Your tanks were weak," one said. "Your armor was paper." To which an American commander replied, "Yes, but ours could move." That one sentence summed up the entire philosophy of victory. The legacy of the M18 Hellcat extended far beyond the battlefield. It changed how armies around the world thought about mobility and innovation. The doctrine of shoot and scoot, fire, move, survive, became the foundation for modern armored tactics. Even decades later, tanks and vehicles would be designed with one lesson in mind: speed is protection. At the U.S. Army Armor School, a restored Hellcat now stands at the entrance, painted olive green and scarred with history. On its plaque are 3 words that define its story: seek, strike, destroy. But for those who know its true meaning, it represents something deeper. It represents the idea that freedom, like speed, must always stay ahead of tyranny. In the end, the Hellcat was more than a weapon. It was a teacher. It taught that courage is not about standing your ground. It is about daring to move. It taught that innovation often comes from imperfection. And it taught that in war, as in life, the strongest armor is not made of steel, it is made of spirit. Every nation has its heroes, and every war has its machines. But few machines have ever captured the heart of a nation quite like this one. Because the Hellcat was not just an American tank destroyer, it was the embodiment of America itself. Fast, free, relentless, and unwilling to stand still in the face of danger. As the years passed and the world rebuilt, the lessons of World War II faded into history books. But the truth remains, etched into the steel of every surviving Hellcat. Victory doesn't belong to the strongest. It belongs to the fastest mind, the freest soul, and the bravest heart. When the guns of Europe finally fell silent in May of 1945, the world took its first deep breath in years. The soldiers went home, the factories went quiet, and the ghosts of battle began to fade into memory. But the lessons of World War II remained, written not just in books or monuments, but in steel, sweat, and sacrifice. The M18 Hellcat stood as one of those lessons. It was a reminder that true strength does not come from perfection. It comes from imagination. The Germans built masterpieces of engineering. The Americans built machines that won wars. The difference lay not in metal, but in mindset. In World War II, the Hellcat raced across Europe like a whisper of freedom, proving that the fastest weapon is often the will to adapt. It didn't rely on thick armor or heavy guns. It relied on courage, teamwork, and a belief that a free nation could think its way to victory. In World War II, that belief was tested in fire, and it prevailed. The young men who drove those machines were not born heroes. They were mechanics, farmers, and factory workers. Yet, in the frozen forests of Belgium and the burning villages of France, they became symbols of something far greater than themselves. Every turn of the engine, every thunderous shot, every narrow escape carried the same unspoken message. Freedom moves fast, and that message still matters. Today, in a world again trembling between unity and division, the Hellcat story is more than history. It's a mirror. It reminds us that strength without wisdom leads to ruin, that innovation without compassion leads to chaos, and that freedom, like speed, must always keep moving forward. Because victory is never permanent, peace is never guaranteed, and justice is never automatic. They are things we must continue to build together. So, as you watch the restored Hellcat gleam under the sun at Fort Moore, remember the hands that built it, the minds that designed it, and the souls that drove it. Remember the 3 minutes that changed the course of battle, and the idea that changed the course of history. If you believe that innovation is the true path to peace, say it loud. Fight for peace. Fight for freedom. Fight for justice. Because sometimes victory is not about who shoots first. It is about who dares to move faster. And in World War II, the M18 Hellcat did exactly that.